To deny that illusion exists is to be completely unconscious in your life. The US dollar is a pyramid scheme, right? There's no value. We print money. Look, we have an efficient economy. It's been working. There are booms and busts, but it's an illusion of value, right? There's no real value there. People do not have an innate love or passion for what they do. It's really a means to an end. And starting right there, if that's not an expose into a piercing the veil, I don't know what is. It's about taking responsibility for our consciousness and for our society and saying, look, we've been led astray. We have placed materialism, consumerism at the forefront of our minds, and it's not putting us on the right path.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Shifting Dimensions podcast, where we explore the unseen, the unknown, and the transformative moments that shift our understanding of reality. I'm your host, Jumi Moses, spiritual seeker and metaphysical investigator exploring the mysteries of existence. On the show today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Aaron Books. Aaron speaks about systematic issues that exist in our modern day society that prevent us from reaching higher levels of consciousness. His knowledge includes topics ranging from manifestation techniques, vibration and energy laws, universal laws, economic systems, healthcare, education, capitalism, spirituality, and religious institutions. Aaron also has real world business and financial market experience, having worked on Wall Street for over 2 decades. He's also the host of the podcast called The Manhattan Prophet. Aaron, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm so excited to speak with you today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited as well.
Before we got started, I was saying to you that I binge listened to almost all of the episodes on your podcast because I really appreciate what you talk about, but not just what you talk about, but how you distill the information, which is what I absolutely love. It's very digestible, at least for me. And why I was also drawn to you as well is because you're a truth seeker, right? And I consider myself a truth seeker as well. That's why I like to have these types of conversations. So I just want to jump in and first ask you, do you still work on Wall Street?
So I guess technically I do still work, but I've taken a bit of a hiatus. I am not presently active in the industry, if you will, but I still have ties there. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to start off by asking you that because, again, like you said, a lot of the work you do is to try to speak the truth about these different systems that we're integrated in our day-to-day lives. And I have a quote from you, actually. You say, through truth and knowledge, we're able to evolve consciously because they illuminate what has been hidden within ourselves and the world around us. Truth dismantles illusion, freeing us from the unconscious programming, inherited beliefs, and societal conditioning that keeps us in cycles of fear, limitation, and disempowerment. And a lot of, again, what you speak truth on is just the rat race that we all find ourselves in. So I was curious to know if you were still working on Wall Street. Why are you so passionate about waking people up to the truth of these different systems, as you call it? And what exactly are you waking them up to?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it lends itself perfectly to my experience on Wall Street. In fact, there's a direct correlation, right? So I think that because of my experience and because of what it takes to succeed, right, in that pressure cooker environment, to me, it's you're going at war every day in a way, right? It's a real dog eat dog environment. And for a lot of people, when you have a lot of people in the space looking to enlighten or wake people up or who are spiritual, they have this like aha eureka moment when that's brought on by maybe trauma, or they go on some specific retreat and they have some amazing experience due to meditation, or I call it an acute experience. I think that my awakening, if you will, has really been an accumulation over the years, and maybe it's been unconsciously traumatic, my journey by way of Wall Street, but because of the sacrifices that I've had to make, I think that it's made me come to really stark realizations, and it really put a lot of these issues at the forefront of my mind. I'm not going to attribute all of this to Wall Street. I have really always had an inherent thirst for knowledge, for truth. I was a philosophy and economic theory major in college, and I've really always, again, been looking for answers and reasons to things. A type of real curiosity that, again, I think has anchored me in this pursuit. Yeah.
So just to clarify, so what you're saying is that you have always had a passion for understanding the world with you being a philosophy major and seeking knowledge, seeking truth. But I guess with you working on Wall Street, you called it the dog eat dog world, right? It maybe awoken you up more to the reality that we are in some sort of illusion that's keeping us trapped. Is that a fair assumption or summary of what you were just talking about?
Yeah, I think that there are all these kind of elaborate ways of explaining this circumstance. You have people talking about us living in a matrix and a prison for our mind, and there's a movie, The Matrix, and there's other movies or texts that allude to that. And I think that it's certainly great to have those kind of metaphorical, artistic expressions, but what happens is, and this is psychological, what happens is people externalize these things, right? And it's very hard for people to look at themselves in the moment, right? And oftentimes you find that people only come to realizations when they look back on history. And what's remarkable is really how embedded we are as a society in a certain mind state, right? So again, let's forget about these crazy concepts of a matrix and a prison for our mind. There's certain truth to that, but let's dial it back, right? Let's just look at our day-to-day life and existence, which I think is really the beginning eye opener to a journey like this, where you say, objective facts, I'm spending 50, 60%, 70% of my day, of my waking hours at a job to make money. I if you have children, I spend an hour to 2 hours when I get home. I go to sleep. I wake up, I rinse, repeat, right? So let's start right there. Those actions dictate one thing. Your tantamount, your top priority in life is to accumulate money. That's your singular focus. There's nothing else you can say that will dissuade my viewpoints on that because that's where you are designating your time. Now, there's certainly variation to that statement where if you have somebody who truly has an inherent joy to doing their job, which is really, and I've stated this, is like the real hack to the way society is structured. That's a very different story. But what you'll find is in the majority, people do not have an innate love or passion for what they do. It's really a means to an end. Bless you. That's great if you can do that, but that's just not the norm. And starting right there, if that's not an expose into a piercing the veil, I don't know what is.
You talk a lot about these modern systems that were initially created to be of benefit to us, but they've somehow turned into the opposite of what they were created for, right? Where you talk about the media, you talk about government, you talk about even the education system, right, at large. So, can we talk a little bit about how these systems manipulate our perception of reality?
Certainly. And I would say that level of manipulation transcends multiple planes. And I think that it's not even necessarily a one-way street, right? I don't think that it's not like there's a wizard casting a spell and then you're hypnotized, right? It's a two-way street. This is important because I think that we have to take responsibility as a society and as individuals ourselves to recognize the maybe difficult truths of how we are living our lives consciously and what we accept as I call it accepting as divine, these sort of inherited belief systems that we just assume that's how it is. There's no other way to view things because this is what our parents told us, or this is how we're living our life, and this is how everyone else is doing it. This is a very closed-minded way of living your life and viewing the world, in my opinion. Back to your question, what you'll find is that, and I believe this, is that systems are a mirror to how our collective consciousness is as a society, right? So when you look at originally, they're meant to help our society evolve, right? So you have you're really drilling it down. You have groups of people and they're looking to accomplish a common goal, or one person or a few people can't do it. There needs to be some structure in place that allow society or groups to ascend past certain hurdles, if you will. So we have an education, and there's also the common good, right? So education system is supposed to serve a public good, enlighten, inspire, create good stewards of morality, if you will, good citizens. You want good citizens as part of your country. Government is supposed to protect and serve. Be sort of rooted in ideology, rooted in a value system. And what has happened is, and this is really, I think it's really profound and scary, but in the American society, the main driver is the capitalist system. And in the capitalist system, just by virtue of what it is, it's profit over everything else. It doesn't matter what it eats. It doesn't matter what it eats up in the way. It's about making profit. It's about increasing margin. It's about the end justifies the means, right? And this is viewable in the way the court systems work. This is viewable in the way corporations are allowed to operate. This is viewable across many different facets. And to your point, it bleeds into what I call sacred systems: the education system, the healthcare system, the even the government system, right? So what happens is when you have capital really ruling, capital is king, it starts infiltrating different systems for industrial or corporate interest. And if people don't see that, then they just haven't, they're not looking close enough. But it's quite obvious. And you can, and this is documented stuff, right? So if you look at the American educational system, it was constructed out in the open by industrialists at the turn of the 20th century to create, it was formed after the Prussian model. And it was really to create obedient, docile workers who would conform and who would work in an industrial capacity or a bureaucratic capacity to serve as a function, right? There are statements made by some of these founders, Rockefeller, Carnegie. I think one of the main spokesmen was this guy Gates, who basically said, we're not looking to create philosophers or lawyers or doctors. We're looking to create people who can serve industry. So again, back to your introduction, if you don't have that knowledge, if you don't know that's how your education system was structured, then how are you able to really grasp your indoctrination or what you've been taught or how you've been taught to think about your own existence from a very young age? You are completely detached from that, right? This to me is a crucial fact. I can keep going if you'd like into the way other systems have been infiltrated, but this to me really cuts at the core. And again, I can keep going if you'd like, but I don't
Yeah,
want to.
no, I would love for you to give another example, especially as it
Sure.
pertains to the healthcare system.
Yeah. So the healthcare system is again another overt example of how these industrialists penetrated through self-interest and capital. We had a really natural-based, holistic medical system in place before the turn of the 20th century. People were using bells, the resonance of bells, frequencies, natural herbs. You can go back, you can find books on this stuff, and this stuff is still used to treat anything from flu symptoms to arthritis, et cetera, et cetera. But what you had an industrialized transformation where healthcare would be sold. It wasn't free to the citizen. You had to purchase your health, right? You had the allopathic method, which was pushed, and these were derived mostly from petrochemical companies, petroleum interest through Rockefeller. He structured the entire industry around this method of treating diseases and illness. He also did things like he created the American Cancer Association, American Medical Association. He offered grants to universities, to individuals who were studying medicine. They were basically paid to study his methods. But people don't know this, right? So if you don't have that knowledge, and these structures literally exist today, right? If you look at the way that people treat cancer, you have to use chemotherapy, you have to use radiation or surgery. Those are the three ways. Anything else is considered illegal. You are buying medicine to treat symptoms, not cure disease. This is widespread knowledge out in the open, but people don't think of it that way. And again, with this method of a kind of pay for play leaks into even the food industry, where you have petrochemical companies that are creating and patenting our produce. They're creating GMO products, and people don't think of GMO this way, but they're creating GMO products so that they can patent and own the food, literally own the seeds. And they created it because when they started using the pesticides to kill the insects, it was killing the vegetation as well, but the produce as well. So they said they were smart. They said, we're going to create GMO-based products that will withstand these pesticides. We're going to own this, and we're going to basically own the food supply, right? These are from petrochemical companies. This is all a byproduct of systems being penetrated by a capitalist mindset, et cetera. And again, it transcends almost all of the Western, at least American society.
When I was listening to one of your podcast episodes, there's an example that you gave that was very eye-opening, which you talked about how the American Heart Association was in favor of continuing to supply elementary schools with this particular type of beverage. I think it was soda, some sort of fruit soda or something, which obviously high fructose corn syrup isn't good for the health of young children. And the American Heart Association was actually in favor of keeping these beverages in the schools, which I thought, wow, I know this stuff runs deep. All of what you're saying is not new information for me, but I thought that was a very interesting example because I did not know that. And you've mentioned a lot of times that we're indoctrinated to always have money on our mind, and everything we do is to accumulate more money, which is also similar to what these big corporations are doing. Everything is for profit, there's no humanity, or it seems to be a lack of humanity when it comes to these systems that were upheld or put in place to serve humanity. It seems like it's actually doing the opposite of that. What's interesting about what you talk about is the fact that you don't really talk about dismantling the system. You talk about how to awaken within it and still, in a way, and let me know if I'm wrong, still be a part of the system, but not be consumed by it. How is that possible? How can people do that?
So, and this is again, look, it's my belief that I believe that there are impediments to this belief, but I believe that an evolution of consciousness, it takes place in small steps. I'm gonna pass on from here, and hopefully the education that I've imparted on people and the ways that I've expressed viewpoints will impact groups of people, and those people will impact, and there'll be some sort of an evolution thereafter. But and this kind of way of thinking is important because you can't overcome these systems by fully rejecting them. You can also, it's just not practical, right? To say, look, there are these systems and we're going to oppose them completely. We're going to denounce money. We're going to leave the system and go live on a farm in isolation. This is not practical, right? Because what you're doing is you're saying, and effectively, you're in many ways empowering the system because you're cutting yourself off from necessities that you gain from the system. And again, it's not about the systems being inherently bad. It's about the underlying consciousness within the system, and that consciousness is derived from human beings, from humanity. So it's my core belief that we can change. These systems will evolve consciously as we evolve consciously, right? We need an education system. We need a government that protects us because there are still enemies. We need access to electricity, right? So there are essential parts of these systems that we need to have in order to live a good life, right? It's not about pushing these things to the side. It's about taking responsibility for our consciousness and for our society and saying, look, we've been led astray. We have placed materialism, consumerism at the forefront of our minds, and it's not putting us on the right path. And just as we've structured society in this way, so too can we restructure society. And it's a really about, so to fully answer your question, it's really about using, again, these systems as a mirror and extracting information about how to look at ourselves and the world around us, but also to say, listen, why am I doing this? Is this the way I want to live my life? Is this system structured the way it should be? And that can be an eye-opening moment. That can be a moment of awakening where you're piercing the veil and you're saying, wait a second here. This doesn't make sense. I don't want to live my life this way. I don't want my children to grow up in a society this way. Maybe something's wrong here. And not to get political, because I don't want to get political. And I consider myself an independent thinker, and I don't really have a real political affiliation. I look at things very objectively, or at least what I consider to be objective. But what the recent administration in the United States has uncovered is just dramatic. To see how these companies have infiltrated government agencies, FDA, USDA, to allow artificial flavoring that contains carcinogens into our food supply, to allow just an overt manipulation of these systems on a pay-for-play basis is just, it's disgusting. It's the rot of capitalism. And it's really, it takes your breath away in a bad way, because it's just not the way any of this stuff should be set up.
You talk about the misalignment of purpose, right? Or the misidentification of purpose. And also, you talk about the importance of self-examination. And I do want to talk about that. But before we even get there, I think it's also important to talk about or highlight something else you've spoken about in the past, which is this idea of a lot of what we're talking about now, at some point, people consider to be a conspiracy, right? You talk about how conspiracy theories went from actually being a term used to understand or get to the bottom of the truth. And now it's seen as a way to discredit people who are questioning things. So, can we talk a little bit about that? And again, how some of these things are considered conspiracy theories and what the harm of dismissing things based on them being a conspiracy can really do to our ability to really get to the truth?
Yeah, so this is actually a very complex topic. So again, the term conspiracy theory wasn't always pejorative, right? It took on a new form, and I mentioned this after JFK was assassinated. And what you had happen was you had intelligence agencies saying, look, and this is documented stuff, right? We are going to ostracize those who use this term and who really are looking for more information, who are looking to understand what's going on. And there has been a real suppression of information. The American public at large doesn't know what's going on a mass scale, not just with respect to the foundation of our ideology and belief systems, but with respect to what goes on, right? From scientific technology to all sorts of topics, just foreign affairs, etc. And there are tons of conspiracy theories in the negative sense that ended up being real. And actually, Senator Kennedy famously, as he was speaking, I think, to some nominee, and he said, it looks like theorists are like 34 for 34. So these conspiracy theories end up being real conspiracies. And I also talk about how, quote unquote, conspiracies are really at the bedrock of capitalism. There are so many ways to look at the idea of conspiracy. And a problem, however, with looking at conspiracies and identifying those conspiracy theories that in fact took place are you have people who misidentify conspiracy theories with real conspiracies, and they point to facts that don't add up, or they come to conclusions that aren't necessarily linear, or they make assumptions, or they justify their misfindings with incorrect information. So it's really important to have a proper way to discern truth from falsehood. And there are many things that I've looked into where I can't find the truth. I can't figure out or I don't have enough information to come to a conclusion, I won't touch it because to me, it's just not worth it. I might have an idea based on other things that have happened. Theories like just an overt one, theories like the flat earth theory or whether we landed on the moon. There are so many different ways, so many different pieces of information. It's just to me, maybe it is a conspiracy. Maybe it never really happened, but it's just very hard to nail it down. And also to me, it's not necessarily so consequential. There are bigger issues that I think ought to be addressed, like again, deals that the US made with Saudi Arabia to prop up the US dollar or the foundation of the Federal Reserve Bank or corporate conspiracies that destroyed thousands of lives in America with the opioid epidemic and the Sackler family, Purdue Pharma, or the tobacco conspiracy. These were things that were covered up that were considered conspiracy theories. People were considered crazy if they thought that they actually were going on. And then you find out later that they in fact took place. See, I'm going on a tangent here, but the point is that there there are so many things that take place that are conspiracies, and in many ways, especially in a capitalist economic system where things are dependent on conspiracies, things are dependent on illusion, right? Markets move with illusion and belief. So it's a interesting call to say that these are all conspiracies with no validation. It's kind of no, it just you don't get it. You're missing the point here. It's just not the way the real world operates. You need illusion. You need to have a there needs to be an illusory structure to prop things up to keep things moving efficiently. That's just baseline. Just the US dollar is a pyramid scheme, right? There's no value. It's we print money. Look, we have an efficient economy. It's been working. There are booms and busts, but at its core, to me, it's an illusion of value, right? There's no real value there. But this, to me, people don't understand or care to look at because it doesn't impact their ability to accumulate more money or take care of again, people have other priorities. But this conspiratory construct, this illusory construct, again, there has been an exposed deep state that has a history of concealing information, and it's really becoming way more out in the open now. And these topics, I think, are resonating more with people as more information comes to the forefront.
I want to dig deeper into the concept of we need illusion to make society work. I think it's very fascinating because I've talked to so many people on the show, and we've talked about the fact that we live in an illusion. And a lot of times, those conversations tend to be a little bit more abstract and talked about from the metaphysical side of things, more spiritual side of things, about being in some sort of illusion. But it sounds like there are elements of that in what you're talking about, but really you're talking about a more physical illusion that's put in place that a lot of people, the masses, are not aware of. And that, in a way, keeps us in line, keeps us in check to be able to feed into this illusionary system. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. Just so you know, I have a deep belief in the, let's call it a more of a metaphysical illusory construct, which we haven't even touched on. And I think that's derived from a lot of what I'm speaking to now. But there is a fully inherent illusory construct that exists propping up the capitalist economy and markets, right? For example, I spoke to this money is created out of debt and thin air. It's a credit-based monetary system. There's no gold standard anymore. There's no store of value backing our dollar. Now, I can go into why that happened, and I don't necessarily disagree with why it happened. It probably should have taken place given the historical backdrop in order to preserve the United States at the time. But at the end of the day, that's just what it is. Another thing that people don't realize is that natural resources, the value of them is fabricated. The real supply demand idea of a valuation model is not true. You have organizations like OPEC that control the value of oil. Oil is prevalent all around the world, right? But if you control the majority of it with a group of other countries that control or that have the supply, then you create the pricing, right? So when you see these markets, oh, oil's at $100 a barrel or at $20 a barrel, right? Yes, there are times where there will be mass fluctuation due to some outlier, black swan event, if you will. But at the end of the day, the value of the barrel of oil is determined by the people who own the supply, not determined by real market factors. It's just a fact. Diamonds, it's a complete scam, their value. Oh, you give there's the diamond companies have underground vaults. The De Beers has publicized this. They hoard the diamonds and they control the supply. So that's illusory value, right? So if people understood that if this was exposed or if there was some sort of a crack in that belief system or way of looking at things, it could be problematic. So in this sense, and this again, this lends itself to the idea of some shadowy group of people that are using us as puppets. That's it's probably not to that extreme, but there are people that, again, control value, that control markets. And it's for better and for worse, right? It keeps things in check and you need them there in many cases. Now, if it's used not to stabilize, but to control, it's a different paradigm, right? But to deny that illusion exists and that we depend on illusion is just not true. Now, this transcends past market dynamics, right? You have, if you look at advertising and behavioral science, and you have like surveillance capitalism now, where your activity is literally monetized. It's purchased and sold, and you are fed things that algorithms determine you want. And so you see it, and this is very direct, but you see it and you think, oh, I want this, but maybe you didn't really want it. Maybe it was because it was pushed on you, or maybe, again, and that's an illusion of desire in many ways. There are all these cosmetic surgery fads where, like the Brazilian butt lift, or you have some celebrities who are going out and getting their injections in their lips. Do you really want injections in your lips? Or are you doing it because they want you to, because they're doing it and you want to be cool? So again, these are it's a wide sort of understanding, but to deny that illusion exists is to be completely unconscious in your life.
Yeah, to deny that illusion exists is to be completely unconscious in your life, which is such a fantastic quote that you just gave there. It's interesting to the point about plastic surgery and stuff. I had the funniest thing happen to me a couple months ago, which was random. I was on TikTok, and every time I would go on, I would start to see a lot of content around people getting rhinoplasties. I think it's the nose remodification surgery that people do. I have never had any issues with my nose. I don't, but I kept coming across a lot of those videos, and I guess I kept interacting with them enough for the algorithm to keep showing them, at least even if I was spending like 5 seconds on the video, to the point where I was like, should I consider, like I had the fleeting thought, should I
Right.
consider a rhinoplasty, which was so
Right.
strange. And I was like, okay, these things are crazy and they're infiltrating my mind somehow. But I just wanted to share that because that was a funny thing that happened. But yeah, I 100% agree with everything that you're saying. And I'm curious to know from the metaphysical stand of this whole topic on illusion, what are your beliefs around that? What are your thoughts around that? Because you did say that you do believe in that aspect of the conversation when it comes to just talking about illusions.
Yeah. So in more of a, and maybe this isn't entirely metaphysical, but let's keep it a little practical, then we'll lead into the metaphysical. We associate this actually touches on the systems, but we in so many ways we as individuals associate our or identify really with these systems, right? Like my religion, my country, my God, right? And we assign those my house, my car, whatever material item it might be also. And we assign identity to those things. But in truth, that's an illusion. That's not who you are, right? That is, and again, let's take that to a deeper level. That's real illusion to understanding that even your thoughts and your feelings are not who you are, right? You have your thoughts, you have your feelings. One of the most empowering things that I think a person can realize is that truth, which is your thoughts and your feelings are not who you are. And that really cuts at the root of all of these neuroscientific, psychological ways of touching on spirituality, affirmations, manifestations. It's about taking control consciously of your mind and putting yourself on a trajectory that you want to be on. Now, if you can't touch those levels of awareness, you're not going to get there. If you are so associating with the bag you're carrying and the car you drive and the country you belong to, you are preventing yourself from making that association, right? So that's when I say these illusions or this way of thinking transcends multiple planes. It really does. And it's multifaceted. And for me, I wanted to get to the root of where this started because it had to have started somewhere. Right? This doesn't just happen. I knew that it was there, but I wanted to get a full understanding of it. And let's put it this way, it didn't just pop out of the sky, right? It was systematic, and to jump to certain conclusions about how systematic it was and how intentional it was is not really what I'm looking to do, but I'm looking to explain to people, and we can talk about that if you want, but explain to people where we got these value systems from, what they were derived of, what that means with respect to your religions, right? And it can really cut at the core, which I think can offend people, but it's just the truth.
On this podcast, we go deep. Don't feel like you need to hold back and be it and sound as practical as possible. I would love to dig deeper into what you believe or what your research has led you to understand of where these systems or these thought processes or this illusion started from, what the origin point was. And if you're still doing research on it, of course, you might not necessarily have the answer, but I would love to know your thoughts on or your beliefs around that at the moment.
Yeah, look, I'm always doing research, so there's always more information to gain, more perspective to gain. And to me, it's really about it's and this is the truth. It's really I don't believe in pushing things as objective truth, right? It's about perspective. So giving people perspective and an ability to see things a little bit differently, right? To question and say, oh, wait, because he said that, resonates with me. I'm going to think about that a little bit differently. And maybe I'm going to think about something else a little bit differently, right? Because that's really how you touch people. If you can get them to shift perspective, not be dogmatic about it, right? That's where you can make real changes, where you can elicit real change. If you go back to ancient civilizations, the Egyptians, the Sumerians, there was ancient knowledge that was suppressed by some modern day institutions, one of which being the Catholic Church. You have the universal laws, hermetic universal laws of vibration, of correspondence, of real mystical, spiritual, but also scientific ways of viewing the world, right? This was the way that people understood. They understood themselves to be part of something greater than themselves, part of a singular source, a collective consciousness, a field, however you want to express that, right? And that was just inherent to their belief system, their understanding of the world. And that's because it's true. It's because we are not just material beings. And it's obvious by virtue of the fact that if you look simply to quantum, forget about the ancient belief systems. Let's look at quantum physics and what we're learning in that field of study. What we're learning is that at our core, we are just vibration. We're just energy. So we talk about illusion. What is more illusory than that? The microphone that you're talking into, your hair, the water you're drinking. It's at its core, they are at their core just vibrational fields, just energy. That's just a fact. Now, we can't see it that way because our faculties are limited in certain capacities, but when you get down to it, that's really what we are. And that vibratory field was understood by ancient civilizations. And again, they digested and they expressed this knowledge in different ways, but that knowledge still exists to this day. Now, where has it gone? Why do only some people know it? The answer is lends itself to what we were talking about, where kind of the people in the know who were looking to establish power understood that if people knew that they were all, in effect, gods, creators that were part of something collectively larger than everything, right? Everything material, then there's a certain empowerment that takes place. So if we look at, for example, let's look at the Abrahamic faiths, right? Judaism, Catholicism, or Christianity in particular, but this transcends Islam as well. But why was there patriarchy, an inherent patriarchy within those religions? The reason is because the sacred feminine, the goddess, was systematically removed from those religions, from those theologies. And the reason was because you can talk about different reasons, but in Judaism, there was a push by the Deuteronomists to basically have a structured law-based way of viewing the world, a ritual-based viewing of the world. That's where you experienced God. That's where you experienced your spirituality. Now, to me, maybe I'm an outlier, but doing things repetitively, having to pray 3 times a day to Mecca, lighting candles on the Sabbath, doing these things, that, yes, it's great. Yes, you're recognizing that you're part of something, but that's not really touching on the true essence of spirituality. You're not individually transcending a plane. You're not individually experiencing a higher realm, if you will. So you saw, and the most overt case was with Catholicism, where the church, through the Dark Ages, through the Inquisition, even into the Enlightenment periods in Europe, where you had knowledge that was overtly suppressed. You had in Italy, that knowledge was suppressed with I forget his name, Pico della Amendola, who he was looking to take the Jewish Kabbalah and Christian mysticism and combine that knowledge into how we understood the science of the world. He brought it to the Pope, and the Pope said, "Oh, this is interesting, but I'm not looking to do that. You're going to go to jail, and we're going to suppress that knowledge." Why? Because to have people view themselves as solely material beings, to disconnect themselves from the sacred feminine, which was really the mystical spiritual side, right? Makes people easier to be controlled, right? To say to them, if you want to access the spiritual realm, if you want to access God, you must go to church, kiss the ring, do these rituals. They took Jesus and God and they externalize the holiness from the individual, right? You must access these things through these external deities or whatever it is. You can't experience it yourself, right? So these were out in the open things that they did to, some say, control. I think it's control, but to manipulate society and belief systems to adhere to their will. And there's so many other ways that they did this, right? They controlled the calendar. They had 100 feast days. They had fast days, and they controlled when you would eat, So it was really all about a mechanism of control. And that's why, and it's frustrating because people today are like, oh, people aren't really religious anymore. They're spiritual. They're pushing back on these institutions. Yeah, you're right, maybe, but the bedrock of our current society is derived directly from Catholicism, directly from that way of corralling people, belief systems. And it's then when you have, again, a force-fed, material-based reality onto people, it moves into your value system. And it's such a nice tangent into the capitalist structure, right? The empire building structure where the end justifies the means, where you care about money. It was a beautiful, fertile ground for those industrial methods, again, of accumulating power, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't want to get into, again, the matrix conspiracy stuff. I want to just talk about real facts and how things evolve. And so, again, just quick background on how that took place.
I appreciate everything that you just said. And there's a quote that I pulled from one of the podcast episodes that I listened to from the Manhattan Prophet. And you said that we're taught to memorize beliefs, not question them. And I think it's in the memorization of those belief systems that also breed a fertile ground for this over identification with this materialistic world that we live in. And you said something very interesting about how the divine was made to be seen as external from us, right? So we're constantly chasing this thing that is outside of ourselves, right? Doing all of these different things that we need to do, that we believe we need to do in order to receive and become one with divine love. But the truth is, the divine spark that is already inherent in us, and the illusion is that we're separate from it. And when we feel like we're separate from it, again, like you said, it becomes this whole matrix of illusions that we find ourselves in and we're not even conscious or awake to. And I think this is a perfect segue to talk about what you consider to be the misidentification of purpose, right? Because at the beginning of this conversation and pretty much throughout this conversation, really, we just talked about how a lot of us, we've been programmed to get into this rat race, and we're constantly chasing money, and our relationships are suffering, and we don't have enough time to do some sort of self examination and reflect. Because another quote from you that I loved, you say, when we align our inner world through self examination, our external reality reorganizes around that clarity. Relationships improve, work becomes more purposeful, and we stop disappearing within systems that were never designed for our fulfillment. So, again, just really want to hear a little bit more about our misidentification of purpose, what you think a lot of us think our purpose is, and how we can find our way back to our true purpose as human beings.
Sure. And I want to answer that with just a caveat that I have no desire to be dogmatic, to tell people how to live their lives and to say this is what you should be doing or what you shouldn't be doing. What I can give you is the construct that I believe based on my understanding of things and obviously my own experiences of what seems like logically an inherent sort of proper path. And the root of all of this is about balance. And this is also a big problem with the spiritual movement because many spiritual gurus, if you will, believe that we just shut off the left brain way of viewing the world, right? We shut off materialism entirely and we just focus on living this right brain spiritual. We're up here and you guys are there and we're in a different place. No offense, but that's doing just as much damage. Maybe not just as much damage, but it's doing the same exact thing. It's not about anything in balance. It's about the balance, right? Because at the end of the day, maybe not physical, we're vibrations, but we are living in multiple planes, right? We exist in multiple planes. So to deny an entire part of ourselves is not the purpose. And my belief is that we are actually, however you want to call it, we are all actually the source. We are all actually the source experiencing ourselves, right? I believe that our existence is about the universal consciousness seeing itself and experiencing itself, right? We have a physical existence. You don't have that physical existence in an eternal realm. You don't get to touch, smell, taste, feel in an eternal realm. So to reject that entire part of you doesn't seem right. So it's about finding a balance between living in the quote unquote real world, right? But also recognizing your true spiritual nature. Now, granted, the present, again, systemic construct is not optimal. It's so skewed to the left that to say, oh, to live in that world and the other world, it makes it very hard. And it's created a really deep schism because it's very hard to hold on to that spirituality, that realization, and exist in the world, which is why the spiritual movements, I think, really resonate with people because they say, oh, this is so bad how it is now. And they gravitate towards the polar opposite, right? So again, for me, it's about honoring both and taking this left brain materialist world that we live in and evolving, right? Consciously saying, this doesn't work anymore. How can we improve it? Because these systems were not meant to oppress. They were not to extract maximum value. We don't need to be growing at a 2 to 3% rate every single year. We don't need to be on this path. We don't need to have inflation, right? Inflation doesn't come from consumers. Inflation comes from central banks. These are manufactured issues. So there are things that we can do to change consciously. So it's about, again, focusing on ways to consciously change the parts of our left brain world, if you will, and honoring and bringing back into our reality our right brain. It's about honoring the patriarchy, honoring the feminine, right? It's about that blend. And that at its core, when you really study the ancient teachings of Christianity, of Judaism, of Hinduism, Buddhism, there is such an underbelly relationship. There is this creationist underbelly of the sacred masculine, the sacred feminine, and there's an alchemy to it with the Holy Trinity, but it's about the thinking creative faculty and the emotional faculty. And when you put them together and you act in the physical realm, whatever, I have to be like careful with my words now. You create, right? That's inherent to our entire existence. So to negate a part of that is not the path. Now, the next problem is how do you structure things? And that becomes a more iterative conversation when it comes to each system. But to me, that's on a high level, macro level, how I view things.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of balance in these conversations, right? Because you have a pendulum, and right now, masses where the pendulum is all the way to the right, and people are working hard to swing it all the way to the left. But it's like, no, we need it in the middle, right? We need to hold space for both identities. And to be quite honest, we can't really, it's hard to really identify ourselves because we're multidimensional beings, right? And we are so stuck on labeling ourselves and putting ourselves in different boxes. Like you said, I'm my work, I'm my religion. Over identification has become so prolific in the society that we currently live in. So I appreciate you for really talking about you're not here to necessarily put forth objective truths. You're here to offer different perspectives to get people to think for themselves and question things. And that's part of my mission for doing this podcast. It's the truth is could be considered a moving target depending on what vantage point you're looking at it from, but it's always important to question things and try to work hard to get closer to some sort of universal truth. But going back to the original question, so with everything that you just said, and as it pertains to purpose, because that's one of the biggest things that we as human beings were constantly looking for while living in this 3D plane. What is our purpose? And people, we've been told a lot of times that our purpose lies within our work. So again, with all the stuff that we've talked about and being part of this illusory system, what do you think? How do you define purpose at this point in your life? And how do you think people misidentify their purpose?
Yeah, sorry, I think I didn't answer the question completely. But let me just, before I answer that again, let me just back up. Another important part is people get so caught up with words, right? It's not about how you label something, the feminine, the masculine, the other dimensions, different planes of experience. It's like, just stop with that. If you're a person, just take a step back and realize, look, like when you're eating food, there's a taste to it, you get full. That's a different faculty than when you're thinking about something or feeling something. Like, let's stop right there. Can we agree on that? That there's different dimensions to a human being, to human consciousness? Let's just start there. Forget about the fancy metaphysical, neuroscience, blah, blah, blah. If everybody can come to terms with that, which I think everybody can, that's a massive step forward because right there you're identifying different levels of experience, different levels of consciousness or unconsciousness and existence. So it's very important to make that distinction or make that sort of statement because people get so bogged down and caught up with the complexity of spirituality. But that's really where it starts, right? To just recognize that on a very basic level. Back to purpose, sorry. In these systems, it's about when you have systems that are function as the end justifies the means, meaning that if you make that money, it doesn't matter how you made that money. As long as you made that money, that's valuable. That's purposeful. That's what it's about. That's not, in my belief, true purpose. True purpose is about finding something that you actually enjoy to do. Now, how does that connect to what I was saying before? What it does is it's taking a part of you that inherently enjoys it. It's touching on the feminine. You emotionally engage that part of you. I get pleasure out of doing this. I enjoy creating. And then you bring in the masculine side of creating, of doing, of selling it, of reaping benefit. So if you can do things for the means, for the doing because you enjoy doing it, sure, extract value from that, make money from that. That to me is such a beautiful way to blend these two really ancient, crucial concepts that people are not aware of. And you don't have to, again, you don't have to look at things the way that I do, but I'm looking at things, I like to get a real fundamental skeletal understanding and then apply that to the real world, right? That's how I look at things. So to me, that's such a life hack where you do something because you enjoy doing it. And that can be, that can offer great purpose. And again, everybody's life is different. Everyone has different trials and tribulations, and those things impact people's purpose differently. But if we're talking on a wide scale basis, not really an outlier conversation, that is such a great way to find purpose in your life.
And I agree with that. And I think that's what I'm realizing for my own life as well, too. Speaking of, everybody's life is different, and a lot of people don't necessarily have the luxury of finding something that they love to do that will allow them to also make money because they have to make money and take care of their family and responsibilities and stuff like that. And given the current climate where so many people are losing their jobs, just want to hear your thoughts on what do you think this shift, what do you think the significance of the shift is, right? Because there's something else you said that you said the world isn't broken, it's remembering itself. So do you think we're at a juncture now where so many people are losing their jobs, so now they're forced to transcend this notion that they're their jobs and they have to continue to work and toil for money till they retire at 65?
Look, that's one way to digest the situation. I think that we go through trials and tribulations in life, whether it's the loss of a job, to come to realizations. Now, I don't, again, there are extreme ways of looking at this, right? Where it's written in the stars that you're a star seed and you're here to do this and this is your purpose and you went through these trials in order to come to this realization. I think that's just part of the human condition. I think that when you experience something difficult, the part of you that moves forward touches on those realizations. And I think that what the part of the universe is getting to know itself, it's about, everyone thinks that we've got it all figured out. We're at the height of evolution, we're at the height of the civilization. But it's just not the case. We're all learning as we go. We don't have the best economic system in place. We don't have the best education system in place, right? This is an evolving construct. The universe is always evolving. We, as a result, are always evolving. And we're going to experience great times and bad times. And the saying, it's about how you prevail when you experience something bad. Yeah, sure, that's true. But it's really about what you're able to consciously come to terms with within yourself. That's important. So maybe it's about awakening due to that thing. Maybe it's about saying, you know what? I've learned that I don't really care about this, or I've learned that, and forget about the job. Maybe it's in a relationship. Like maybe you're in an abusive relationship and some guy just pushes you to the brink and I can't do this anymore. I have to get out of this. That's a moment of awakening. It's small, but it's a moment of awakening. And people, again, people need to be conscious of themselves. So many people are disconnected. They don't have self-awareness. It sounds crazy, but it's the truth. Many people are guided unconsciously through reaction and appetite. They don't ever really think. They don't ever really digest what's going on. So if you can allow yourself to take a breath, right? And this is one of the biggest I think benefits of meditation. Aside from, it calms you and you can touch higher levels of higher dimensions of reality, whatever it is. If you can just take that and allow yourself to settle and just feel yourself. No one, not no one, but so many people don't experience that. They don't ever take a breath and stop and think, is this the way to live my life? Should I be drinking alcohol every night? Should I be eating a box of Oreos every night? Is that the best way to live my life? Will I feel better if I do something else? We get into habits, we get into repetition. We don't break those unless we take that step back. To answer your question, losing your job might be one of those things, right? But in my opinion, the underlying situation is that we are always evolving. The universe is always evolving. It's getting to know itself differently. Your experience is the universe getting to know itself differently. My experience is we all have unique experiences. No two perceptions are the same. No two things are the same. This transcends physics, right? It's a fundamental law of the universe. That uniqueness, that diversity is the linchpin of so much, right? That's why it's like people are racist or anti-Semitism. It's such a fundamental flaw in thinking. Without diversity, if you reject diversity, you're rejecting the universe. You're rejecting yourself. You just don't realize it, but you are. That's the truth.
You said that on your podcast as well, and I thought, wow, that was such a powerful quote. That was such a powerful thing to say, a couple quotes related to this whole concept of diversity in consciousness and waking up to yourself. One of them, you say, if uniqueness is cosmic law, then resisting diversity is a form of cognitive dissonance. I thought that was a bar. When we honor uniqueness, we're not just accepting of others, we're completing ourselves. So good. Those lines are so good. But I think the reason I want to talk about this a little bit further is because you say consciousness evolves through diversity. So the more we're conscious of all the diverse experiences around us, even the diverse experiences that we're experiencing and the diverse people around us, the more that we can expand consciously. And I just think that's so powerful because I think as people, we want stability. I think that's also why illusions work and why we get sucked into them because they offer stability. They offer guidance, something that we can rely on. Religion, education, governments, healthcare, whatever you want to call it, right? So we don't want to question things because we're questioning our reality, which makes us feel very uncertain. But if we don't question things, then we don't see the diversity of this life. We don't see the diversity of our existence, and it keeps us in many ways unconscious. So I really love that you tie diversity to the evolution of our consciousness. And yeah, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, but I just think it's such a powerful thing.
No, I completely agree with you. I think that's spot on. And I think that it's not just about people. If you say diversity, people right away go into, oh, somebody's race, right? That's not what we're talking about, right? It's about diversity of thought. We don't evolve as a civilization if we don't accept other ways of thinking of things. Einstein, Galileo, Copernicus, they had evolved ways of thinking. Look where those evolved ways of thinking pushed us as a civilization, right? Those are diverse ways of viewing things. And when somebody can experience diversity of thought, diversity of art, diversity of people, right? Different personalities, they themselves grow. They themselves evolve, whether they realize it or not. Unconsciously, they do. You meet somebody on the street and they say something to you and it impacts you, or they make you feel a certain way. You will change as a result of that. It's just the way it is, just the way the universe works, right? And one thing that I found, which is really quite interesting, is in all of these topics and all these discussions, it's remarkable actually, but they all transcend planes, right? They exist in our day-to-day life. They exist in our emotional states. They exist in our thinking faculties. They exist across all planes. And to me, if that doesn't tell you something, I don't know what does. You cannot reject something that impacts you in every part of your life, every part of your conscious existence. It's just, it needs to be taken seriously.
100%. So I have to ask out of curiosity, I know at the beginning you said that, yes, you still work in Wall Street, but you don't have as many ties. What does your what do you think your evolution is going to look like in the next year or two in terms of like your work in Wall Street? Are you looking to continue to be in Wall Street, or are you looking to do something else outside of that?
Let me at least first say something. I think that Wall Street in general gets a bad rap. I think that there are definitely people who I think that there are bad actors and probably maybe more because of the nature of the industry. But everybody's not like that. There are people there who enjoy modeling cash flows and coming up with ways for companies to expand or enjoy quantitative analysis and coming up with different ways to make money. These are not inherently bad things, right? This is part of what keeps the engine going. Again, this is when people generalize across the board in any industry or group of people, this is a small-minded way of viewing things. That's the first thing that I want to say. Now, with respect to where I'd like to be, what I'd like to be continuing work on Wall Street, if I could take what I'm doing now with this podcast, I'm writing a book and I could make a living out of that and support myself the way that I want to, I would not work on Wall Street, to answer bluntly, right? Because Wall Street to me is a means to an end. And that end, in my mind, doesn't justify itself.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm wishing that for you too. I hope you are able to
Thank
get to
you.
that place. Well, this has been a great conversation. Really appreciate your insights. I enjoyed it. And honestly, if you want more of these types of conversations, I really encourage everyone to check out Aaron's podcast, The Manhattan Prophet. Love the name, by the way. Really good, great podcast, fantastic podcast. But before I let you go, I always have to ask my guests, have they shifted in perspective on anything recently since the podcast is called Shifting Dimensions? I feel like we're constantly shifting our perspectives. It could be as lighthearted as you'd like it to be or as deep as you'd like it to be.
Sure. Honestly, I have not made any major perspective shifts recently. I will tell you that I'm always researching and looking into different things. My recent podcast that I just put out, my recent episode of my podcast I just put out yesterday is on the current nature of higher education in the United States. And again, how capitalism has really eroded the value of education, which what it should be. So again, in embarking on different episodes, you always pick up new perspective. But and on my core, I haven't found anything recently that has pushed me in a completely different direction, to be fair.
I hear that. I hear that. And like you said, you're constantly doing research on different topics. So I'm sure you're gaining like tidbits and different sort of perspectives, but nothing like world or life changing at the moment. Okay, where can people find you if they want to learn more about you outside of your podcast, which we've mentioned a couple of times now?
Ooh, where can I find them? I don't know. I have a very small social media presence. I find that I'm able to express myself better in the podcast. And I also, there's a little bit of a superficiality to it. I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, but those aren't really my primary focuses. I'm in Manhattan, so they can find me in Manhattan.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is the best way to find you is by listening to your podcast, and people, I guess, can look at the show notes and reach out through that. But thank you again, Aaron, so much for joining me on Shifting Dimensions.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.